All right. Looks like we've got a pretty good showing so far. I'll go ahead and get started since I know we do have a full content day today. So welcome everyone to the Simio Solution Series, Friday, August the 26th. And I do say Friday. We are back to doing our sessions on Friday. So welcome to everyone. We jump into the opening here. So today's session is unlocking your model with process logic. I'm Dan Vasileni, VP of Global Sales here at Simio. You may have heard my voice before, and I would turn my camera on if I could figure out how to look at both screens, but I'm not going to do that today. And presenting today is me, Adam Sneath. He's going to be doing most of the talking, so you'll only hear my voice for another minute or two, and then we will jump into Adam. Couple of housekeeping items before we get going. Please be aware that everyone is on mute today when you enter today's session. Today's session is being recorded for replay purposes. So if you want to go back and watch or rewatch this session, or you want to refer it on to a colleague, it'll be on our webpage soon after we finish today's session. I know the last session we did, it took us a little bit of time to get up and running on the website, but this one should be up much quicker today, or worst case over the weekend. And as I said, everyone is muted as you come in today. If you do have any questions during today's session, you should see on the GoToWebinar dashboard somewhere located on your screen. On my screen, it's on the right side. On your screen, you may have moved it around. There is either a chat or a question area within the GoToWebinar dashboard. In that area, specifically in the question area, during today's session, if you have a question, type it in there, and we will try to answer those questions as we go. If the question is specific to what Adam's talking about, I will try to interrupt and ask the question. If the question is more generic in nature, or if you'd prefer to wait to type your question in, you can wait till the end of today's session. I do know that Adam has about 45 to 50 minutes worth of talking or worth of content, so we probably will be running up against the end of the hour today. But if you, like I said, so if you have questions, please type them in as we go. Future sessions. So right now, as everyone's probably well aware, we have a little bit of a hiatus since our last session. We were doing them on a bi-weekly basis. This one is about a month after our last session. As we wind down towards the end of summer here, our next session we're going to do also in 1 month. So the next session will be on Friday, September 16th, material handling, transportation, and warehouse modeling. And then we will get our next sessions planned at that point in time. The October sessions and the future are not specifically scheduled yet, simply because of Simio Sync, which I'll talk about here in a second. If you do have any suggestions on future webcasts, as I always ask, feel free to send them to me, dvasileni@simio.com, and we will try to add them in. I know that some of our sessions up to this point have been customer recommended, so we are more than willing to listen to your suggestions, and if we can put a full hour on, we are more than willing to do it. In regards to Simio Sync, as I just mentioned, so Simio Sync right now, it's scheduled for Tuesday, October 25th. It will be a one-day virtual conference. This is our biannual conference. We are still working on the theme as we speak. I know we're pretty much 2 months away from it as we speak today. Just a list of future, or I'm sorry, prior speakers we've had. We do already have a pretty nice list of speakers for this particular event, but since we are still working on the agendas, we didn't want to list them yet, just in case someone either has to bow out or in case we don't have time for all the sessions. Feel free to register today, though, at simiosync.com as we get into or get closer to the event. With that said, I will turn the session over to Adam. Adam, I'll let you go ahead and grab control of the screen, and it will be yours to go forward.
All right. Let's try to share my screen. I want monitor 2. Looks like it's loading up. Can you see the title slide?
Sure can. You are good to go.
Loud and clear. All right. Great.
Yep, you sound good.
Hey, everyone. Great to be with you today. We'll go ahead and get started. Just wanted to say a quick hello, and I'm going to turn my webcam off. But I think this will be an exciting session, and I think this will be interesting for both, perhaps especially for newer Simio users, but also for more advanced users as well. What's our topic today? So we're going to be discussing in some detail process logic. And we have a sort of mantra at Simio that if you can describe it, we can model it using process logic. So this is our tool for introducing custom logic or decisioning to the model. And I don't want to spiel too much about it now because we're going to see a lot of examples as we move into the software. So our agenda for today is going to be in 3 categories, more or less. We'll start by developing process logic, and we'll focus on common steps, add-on process triggers, tokens, object references, and some tips for syntax. Testing our process logic using the model trace, a button from our run ribbon called the step button, breakpoints, and by color coding our steps in the process logic. We'll also discuss various debugging scenarios and techniques like errors, warnings, and filtering our trace to help us understand what's happening in the model and ultimately resolve issues. So here we have sort of a general methodology that you may follow when you're creating process logic or when you're faced with process logic. First, we want to define the requirement. What are we trying to do, right? What are we trying to accomplish? Then we want to identify relevant steps. So steps with a capital S. We'll see what these are if you're not familiar with process logic steps. We want to identify those that might be helpful to us. Then we'll start to draft our process, and we want to sort of continuously test our logic using the model trace. And my last slide here is just illustrating some of the steps that will be covered today, and hopefully give you some insight as to how these are used and what they're all about. Let me exit presenter mode. The software should be queued up for us. Great. Dan, as I switch over, can you confirm that you can see the software interface now?
Yep, everything looks good.
All right, excellent. So I want to give a disclaimer as we get started. I think this will be a little bit different from other solution series, perhaps a little bit more technical. Process logic is a very important topic in Simio, and I think, perhaps one of the more challenging parts of the learning curve with Simio. So I'm going to throw a lot at you today, but you'll have the recording if you'd like to go back. So hopefully that's a good resource. But the disclaimer is that this model that we're going to build is specifically to show the functionality of process logic. So I don't want you to think that some of the methods we show are the only way, or perhaps even the best way, to do something in Simio. So take what you see in terms of methodology with a grain of salt, as we're really going to focus on process logic and how it works and how we use it. So we start with what looks like a very boring model, but I promise it will get more interesting pretty quickly here. So we have an entity in the system, we have a server, and we have a sink. We don't have a source, mind you. I think this session will also assume some familiarity with Simio. So if you're brand new, some of the things that we talk about might not be very clear. But if you've been, if you've had your hands in the software a little bit, you should be able to follow. So no source, but we have a server and a sink. So as you might expect, if I run this model, whoops, I was doing a little bit of testing, so I had a head start. But if I run this model, nothing happens. We're not creating any entities, so we haven't done anything so far. But our first challenge, thinking back to our last slide, is let's define a requirement that we want to satisfy using process logic. So what I'd like to do is create entities and send them to server 1 using process logic. So to do that, or to get started, we'll flip over to the Processes tab, and we're going to talk a lot about how we can create and execute logic. But we're going to start with a sort of special type of process called on-run initialized. Now, the name gives some indication as to what it does, but if you're not familiar, we can search for it in our help doc and see that we're led to the processes topic. Scroll around, we see that our search term is highlighted. Quick tip, you can always refresh if you want to get rid of the highlighting. And we'll learn that there are 9 standard processes that are available, and onRunInitialized is executed when the object is first initialized. And we're going to come back to the help docs a few times. So Dan, can you also confirm that you can see the separate help window here when I pull this up?
Yep. Currently see it right over top of your screen.
Excellent. And I know the text might be a little small here, folks, but I think it will be fun to sort of go back to the help docs because I want to enable you to do your own exploration and learn more about these topics. So this sounds pretty good. This logic is executed. Remember this word because we'll talk about this a fair amount when the object or model is first initialized. So we've created our process. And what do we want to do? We want to create entities and send them to server 1. So now we're going to start using these steps. You see common steps and then all steps. And instead of spending too much time trying to describe what these are, we're just going to start using them, which will give you a good sense. If you want to learn more about any step in particular, you can hover and get a quick description of what the step is and what it does. So we want to create entities. Let's try a create step. What I'm also going to do is sort of methodically give my steps a meaningful name, which will help for a couple different reasons. And right off the bat, we're going to start assigning color to certain key steps in our processes. You'll see why this is helpful for us in a bit. Now, just like other things in Simio, our steps have properties that we see and can interact with in the properties window to the right. So we want to create, we have a create type, a couple different things. We'll see one other one later. We want to create default entity, which we've already dropped in our facility model, and we'll just create one. Next, we're going to use a delay step to create a sort of loop. So we'll delay after we do that for 30 seconds, and then we'll loop back. Now, people often when they see this think, okay, this kind of looks like a flow chart, and that is, I'd say an okay way to think about it. So we have a start and an end or potentially multiple endpoints when we start to introduce steps with multiple branches. And we'll see that this logic is executed sort of following the arrows. And we're going to use the model trace to help us interpret what's happening. So on our created branch, let's use a transfer step. So the second part of our requirement is we want to send our entities to server 1. So we'll select a 2 node with a node name of input at server 1. Okay, now we've drafted some logic, and what we want to do next is test our logic using the model trace. Now we have a really cool feature called a breakpoint that's extremely helpful for doing that. So we'll put a breakpoint on the first step in our logic. We'll go back to the facility view and we'll turn on the model trace from the run ribbon and just hit the run button. Now the breakpoint is a way to pause the model effectively at a certain point that I like to focus in on. And the trace, if you're not familiar, is a record essentially of everything that's happening in the run, a really good tool for me, the modeler, to sort of dive into what's happening. Now, another thing that we're going to throw at you right away is this step button. So I can use the step button to go through one line at a time exactly what's happening. Now, there's an important distinction. When you step from literally within the processes window, you get one line at a time. Whereas if you step from the facility view, you can see I just cleared a number of rows essentially in my trace. It was a bigger step. So that's really important to remember as a model developer. If you want to step one line at a time, click into the processes window where you still have a run ribbon and step through one line at a time. So now we can see that my create step is creating one default entity number 7, and transferring that entity to server 1. And then ultimately what happens, and for now we have some evidence that we're on the right track. We'll just watch it and see that every 30 seconds, another entity pops up. So we could track it down in the trace, but we have an idea or evidence here that our delay step is also working and doing what we want it to do. Not bad, right? Moving on. So our next requirement is that we only want to create 10 entities, and we'd like to assign them a batch size. So to help with that, I'm going to click into my model entity, and define an integer state variable called batch size. If you're not familiar with sort of properties and states, take a look in the help docs, or we have some good training materials on them as well. State variables are assignable, strongly typed variables, meaning a string, a real, a boolean, or an integer, or something else that can change while the model is running, or that I can change while the model is running. Property is something that I set at the beginning of the run and then I don't change, like my object properties, for instance, in the properties window. So we've defined this batch size variable, and right away we're going to go back into the process logic, and now we're going to use an assign step. And there's a bit of an art or subjectivity to how you name these steps. So for assigning a model entity state variable, sometimes I'll say me.batchSize. And we're going to assign, we'll use our drop down, model entity.batchSize, a random value between 1 and 6. Okay? And to help us interpret what's happening, we're going to use a nifty property of the entity called dynamic label text to display model entity.batchSize. And we'll just kind of keep the trace on and docked in the bottom while we're doing our exercises in this session. We hit the run button, and straight away, we've got our first runtime error. So as promised, we're going to talk about debugging in this session. So an error is something that actually stops the model, and you cannot proceed until you resolve the error. Okay? And it tells us, so sort of common sense, but we want to get in the habit of interpreting the error message to the best of our ability. And if we're having trouble interpreting it, please reach out to support@simio.com, as our engineers love to help you through your models and making them better. But this one's not too bad. Invalid assignment of 2 point, lots of decimals, to an integer state. Assigned values must be integers. So if you're thinking, well, what if we could just round this value? Then you're on the right track. If you haven't done this before, let's search our help topic for round, and we're led to this math functions. Great thing to be aware of if you're new to Simio, these math functions. So we see math.round with a value argument where digits is the number of significant digits defaults to 0. So what do we want to round in parentheses with an optional argument for number of digits? And you have some examples here. So in our assign step, we'll use our expression editor to append our expression with math.round, and we're not going to pass a parameter, so it rounds our randomly sampled value to an integer. Okay, how do we feel? Let's see. Not bad, right? Now we have an integer batch size randomly assigned to each entity. Pretty cool. So the next part of our task here is to essentially break out of this loop after we've created 10 entities. And to help with that, we're going to use a decide step. What we're going to decide is the number created less than 10. If it is, we'll go ahead and loop back. If it's not, we're going to break out. And this logic is only executed once at the beginning of the run, so it will never sort of start again. And once we break out, we're all done. Now, if you had Simio in college, you might be familiar with the syntax. Default entity dot population number and system is a pretty common one. But if you turn off the filter, we also have a number created function that we're going to use and compare against 10. So if the number created is less than 10, when I do a condition-based decide step, you can see that enter the logical condition. If it's true, I will follow the true branch. If it's false, I will follow the false branch. And we're going to spend a lot of time in the trace, so I don't want to go through sort of every single step that we add, but we're going to use another method to check essentially if this works, right? So we're running the model, suspense is building, we're counting 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're just going to shoot all the way through the 2 hours, switch over to the results, and see that I've created 10 default entities, and they were all destroyed as well. So before I added that decide step, I would have had 100 and something over the course of 2 hours. You can do the math. Every 30 seconds we create one. But now we've capped it at 10. So we are off to the races. And the next thing we're going to do is save our model. And we want to get in the habit of saving our model early and often. So that's one sort of best practice that we're going to assert today. Always make sure you're saving your model. And we also want to continuously verify changes that we're making to the model. So everything we've added in the process logic, we've taken a step back and checked to make sure it's doing what we expect. Okay, so now things are going to get interesting. We're going to add a second server. And for our model today that we're going to be building, we're actually going to be making pizzas in the desert. Now, if you're not familiar with the skybox feature, it's sort of a fun way to apply a backdrop to your facility view in 3D. So you can imagine we have sort of a nice backyard patio with a pizza oven, and we're going to be making some pizzas. Now, to help with this too, if you'll just bear with me for a second, I'm going to take the processing queue, so the place where entities sort of go while they're being processed, and just manipulate this a little bit. It's not sort of a perfect science with drawing these queues. We're going to come down in 3D and basically create 2 racks in our oven. Move this up. Now, if you're not familiar with some of these keystrokes I'm doing, you can press the H key on your Simio and see that, for instance, I can hold down Shift to move an object up and down in 3D. And you can turn that message off with another click of the H key. And that looks about right. So let's pop it back in our oven. How are we doing in 3D? Maybe we'll go a little bit higher, and we should be good to go.
Adam, real quick.
Yes.
Question popped in as you were moving there. How did the little hashtag entity attribute values get attached to the green triangles in the animation?
Yeah, great question. So assuming that, Dan, is your interpretation, we're talking about the little numbers that were floating along the backside?
Yes, that's my interpretation, yes.
Great. Yeah, so for that, we used a property of the entity called dynamic label text, where I can type an expression that will be displayed, as that little gray box attached, sort of as the entity floats along through the model. So the answer is dynamic label text, a great tool. And when you get good with this, we're actually going to update this in a second. You can have conditional, you can have concatenated strings, you can create pretty comprehensive labels to help with interpretability of your model. Great question, thanks.
And we interpreted that one right. We got a yes exclamation point back, so we definitely interpreted that one right.
Nailed it, good to hear. Now, before I forget, I'm going to rename server 2 as my pizza oven. We're going to go ahead and add 2 symbols to the entity, one type of pizza and a second type of pizza, okay? Now, you see as I add these symbols, the symbols ribbon is sort of a nifty thing that appears when I click on stuff. You don't always see that symbols ribbon, but it appears when I select an object, and I can control the look and feel of that object, add additional symbols, add attached animation, and do some different things there. So we've added 2 symbols to make our entity look more like pizza. Now, we need to go back into the process logic because we're no longer going to create just one type of entity. So I'm going to use another decide step to create a 50-50 split. So instead of condition-based, I'm going to use a probability-based decide with a 0.5 probability. If a probability, as opposed to a condition, then enter the chance of selecting true as a value between 0 and 1. Cool. And we're going to have another one just below that will allow us to create 2 types of pizza. We're going to go ahead and make this yellow. So for the sake of time, I'm going through this a bit quickly. But again, we'll have the recording, so if you like to go back, please don't hesitate to do that. Now, how do we get the entity to look like those pizza symbols we added? So we're going to assign, we'll call this, pizza 1, and we'll call this pizza 2. Now you can see another thing that I'm doing. I'm sort of dragging the steps where I feel like they need to be, and just sort of drafting this up. We're identifying the relevant steps, and then we'll go back through and actually code them up, so to speak, right, to get them to do exactly what we need. Then for both types of pizza, we want to transfer them to the pizza oven. So you saw another thing that I did there is I created sort of a split, but then I brought both these branches back to the same transfer step. So half our entities are going to be pizza, half of those are going to be pizza 1 and pizza 2. Now what we need to assign here is model entity dot picture. So this is a model entity state variable, and I'll give you a bit more context as to what this is. It's sort of built in, well, not sort of, it is built into every model entity. If you open Simio and you click on your model entity, you're going to see this. And it's a state variable, there was probably a description there, that is mapped to this index of symbols. So that's why in my assign step, I assign 1 or 2 to model entity.picture, and you'll see the result, assuming I haven't made any mistakes. Okay? So as we've done before, we're going to put a break. Sure, let's do a quick save, and we run. You can see I created an entity that's now hitting this decide step, which happened to be false on our coin flip. So one thing to note about this probability-based decide is it is stochastic. So each time we'll have a coin flip. If we ran this for a large number of entities, we would trend towards 50-50, but it's going to be a coin flip every time. So this one happened to be false. Our next decide also happened to be false. So we're assigning entity picture a value of 2. And let's see if we can track that back to the facility. So we'll do it one more time. When we first create the entity, fun fact, when I use a create step to make entities, they're created at the origin in free space. And then when I hit that assign step, and only once I hit that assign step, does the symbol change to pizza. I'll try not to click back and forth so many times. I know that may be not so easy on the eyes, but it's just a part of our work today. So the next part is, are we actually transferring this thing to the oven? Well, not yet, because I forgot a step, and you saw it kind of fly off into space. So we have to finish out our transfer step to send our entities actually to pizza oven. So let's check it out. One more thing I wanted to do is on my pizza oven server, we're going to give this a processing time that's in hours. So about 1/5 of an hour or 12 minutes to make our pizza seems reasonable, and a capacity of infinity. So now we're running, and we're getting pizzas actually into the oven. Not bad, right? And we could bring this forward a little bit to help us see it a little bit better. Okay, so next we have a hypothetical. What if our pizza oven has a breakdown or an issue? So we're going to do a couple of things. We need to remove all pizza from the oven, and we have to send the pizza to a workstation that is type specific. So pizza 1 will go to one station, pizza 2 will go to another. And we also want to seize a maintenance worker to facilitate the repair. So the first part that we'll knock off, or at least start to set up, is we'll create 2 workstations for our pizza that's removed from the oven. And we're just going to give these a neat trick, is giving the server a processing time of infinity to just sort of hold things until I know what I want to do with them. Now, a failure makes me think of reliability logic, a nice out-of-the-box capability of the server to introduce failure. We're going to do calendar time-based, 5 minutes, just so it happens pretty early on, with a repair time between a ½ hour and an hour and a half. Now, the interesting bit is that we need to remove our pizza from the oven. So we're going to introduce our second method of executing process logic called add-on process triggers, the operative word being triggers. So you can see that each intelligent object has triggers that are sort of sensible based on what that object is and what it does. So my server has triggers like before processing, after processing, failed. That sounds good. Quick shortcut, I can double click on that trigger and it will actually create a new process for me, okay, and establish the reference to this trigger property. Not bad. If I click on the sync, for instance, I have different add-on process triggers like entered, destroying entity, and so forth. Now, what do we need to do? We need to take all our pizza out of the oven when this failure occurs. And for the sake of time, I'm doing a bit more in sort of one chunk than I might recommend. So perhaps you would first check that this failure is actually happening, but our process here will actually be a good way to check that it's actually happening as we intend. Now we're going to introduce a really powerful step, the search step, and I'm going to use this 2 or 3 times throughout the session because there's a lot of different things you can do with it. So we're going to search oven processing. Well, what does that mean? Not a lot yet. Our search step has these collection types, and in this case, we're going to search a queue state. We can also search a table. We can search a lot of different things, population of entities. And in this case, we're going to search pizzaoven.processing.contents. Now, if you're saying, Adam, how the heck do you know what to type there? Well, when we're searching a queue state, you can go back into the facility view and click on that queue to get sort of a hint about the syntax that you need there. Okay. So when this failure happens, we want to search the oven. Limit is a limit to the maximum number of things we can find. We'll say make this limitless. We can also control the directionality of the search, which is sometimes important if you're searching a table or you're searching a queue. In this case, forward is going to be just fine. Okay. Now we need to send the pizza to a type-specific workstation. So we're going to, again, decide pizza type, and we'll call this decide pizza 1. So we'll use our model entity dot picture state as sort of a convenient way to identify our pizza type 1. Double equals for comparison. So if we're pizza 1, go true, otherwise go false. And we're going to have, again, 2 transfer steps to server 2 and server 3. And we'll set these up accordingly. Transfer to input at server 2, transfer to input at server 3. I'm just going to do a quick peek to the other screen. And okay, feeling okay about this. But as we've done a couple times already, we're going to apply a breakpoint and use the trace to see what happens. Now, one quick thing, the batch size doesn't really apply to our pizza. So we're going to update our dynamic label text to say math.if. So as I said before, we're throwing a lot at you today, but if is one of those math functions to define an if statement. Model entity picture equals 0, show me the batch size, otherwise just show me a blank string. So now my green triangles will show batch size and my pizzas will show nothing. Pretty cool. So we expect that failure to happen about 5 minutes into the run, and if we're lucky, we get it. So when that failure happens, it triggers my logic, all right? Now we're going to use the step again and see that we found 5 things in the oven. Well, that checks because we just saw in the facility there were 5 entities there. Now when I find multiple things with a search, what it does is create a token, and we're going to introduce a really important topic that's a little tricky, called tokens. Creates a token for each thing that is found. And that token will flow down the found branch and do the logic that it encounters there. So it says the first one is not pizza 1, so we're going to transfer it to server 3. Uh-oh, we've got another runtime error. So let's check it out. Error initiating transfer. The entity's current location station is invalid for attempting the specified transfer request. For possible causes, check whether the from type property of the transfer step is misspecified. from type property of the transfer step. So previously, we were using a create for our entities that we transferred, so they were coming from free space. But now they're actually coming from a station, right? So pretty helpful error message in this case that should clear up our issue. Now our found entity is transferring to server 3. Let's go back and check it out, see what's happening. Awesome. So we've pulled all our pizza out of the oven. Step 1, we can check that off. And if we run, these are going to hang out infinitely in the servers because we don't know what we want to do with them yet. All right. Now the next piece is that we want to have our. So actually, I want to pause here for a second and talk to you a little bit about tokens. Okay. So to explore sort of what is a token, I'm going to use a notify step. So a notify step, and I'm actually copying this from another model I have on the side, so that's a fun fact. You can copy steps within your process logic, okay? A notify step is a step specifically for writing a message to the trace or a warning or an error. In this case, we're going to write to the trace token associated object name and token context object name. What the heck is that all about? So we'll go back into our help. We'll look at the tokens topic and just read that every token executing a process has an associated object and a contextual object. For a token that has been created by a create or search, for example, the token's associated object is the created or found entity, while its context object is the object that was associated with the original token that executed the create or search. So basically what this is telling us is every token has a built-in associated and context object, which are object references. We said in our slide we're going to talk about object references, but these can change throughout a process. And we've called out 2 instances where they can change, a create or search step. So to explore this, we have a notify before our search and after. And again, like if your head's spinning a little bit, let's just see what happens here and keep this important topic in mind that we'll unpack even further in the next 10 or so minutes. When I start, I see that pizza oven is sort of the only thing that my token knows about. So actually, the pizza oven is both the associated and context object. Now, after the search, and I can sort of see that the created token is associated with entity 16. So now when I hit the notify step, my token association is with that found entity. It's no longer just the pizza oven. And that's hugely important because that affects sort of how the rest of my logic thinks about the token. So we sort of skipped a point. A token you can think of as like bouncing through the steps in my process logic. And you can see sort of individual tokens being enumerated here in the trace. Okay. And on some of my steps like this transfer, it'll say, well, what do you want to transfer? The associated object. So that's why when I get to this transfer step, it knows I want to transfer entity 16, not something else. So we'll just leave these hanging for now, and we'll talk more about that in time here. So the last piece of this is that we need to get a maintenance worker involved. So let's bring a worker out into the facility. And why don't we see if we can find a symbol to animate our worker? Seems reasonable. We won't need this ride station queue, and we'll make them a little bit bigger. Okay, and this first node will be, whoops, I'm editing the model while it's running. Bad idea. So some things it won't let you edit while the model's running, but best practice is stop the model before you make edits. So the first node will be the home node for our worker, and we'll also say, if you're not busy, worker, head back to that node. We're also going to create a second node called oven node, so we can move our worker to the oven to facilitate that repair. Now we're going to do something a little bit radical. I'm going to copy this entire piece of process logic with Control-C-V and rename it as clear oven. So right now, keep in mind, this is no longer being executed. I've specified nowhere that I want to execute this process, but we're still executing our pizza oven failed add-on process. And now what we're going to do is use an execute step, which is another way to sort of kick off some logic. So I'm going to execute the clear oven process from another process. And that's the first thing I'm going to do when the oven fails. I'm going to execute this logic. So I've sort of compartmentalized this, set it aside. And again, it's pretty subjective as to how you want to organize and sort of keep your process logic sorted. I'm just showing you, some practices that I've adopted and that I prefer. But certainly you may feel differently or have your own methods. Now we're going to use a seize step to seize worker one. So a seize step is aptly named, does exactly what it suggests. And we're going to specify that I want worker one to move to a node, specifically move to the oven node that we created. Now, if you're like, what is this seize step? Well, it's pretty similar to on our server, how we have secondary resource requirements that we can specify. What resource do we need? And some other attributes pertaining to that resource seize, okay? And we want to do this after we've cleared the oven. So we feel okay about this. Now we're going to run again with a breakpoint here. We've already sort of checked that part, so we'll bump our breakpoint over to the seize. What we're going to notice is that, go down into 3D, as we're sort of transferring these pizzas out of the oven, right, the worker is getting set to head over in a mad dash to the pizza oven. So it looks like we're doing okay. And now our worker heroically is going to go fix our pizza oven. Now there's one more piece to this. We need to sort of tell the worker when they're finished. For that, we're going to use the repaired add-on process trigger. And another step to release our worker, if I can find it. So when we're all done, once the repair time has occurred, we're going to release worker one. And I'll pause for a minute after we do this, but let's see if we've got this right. Sure, let's leave the trace on. And we said that our repair time is about, 30 minutes to an hour and a half. So our worker's over here, pizza's hanging out at the workstations. Can increase this even a bit more. Did I put the breakpoint on? I did. So after about an hour and some change, we hit that release step and the worker is free to return to their idle node. So I want to pause here. We've covered a lot. There is still some more to cover if we can. But Dan, are there any questions coming through in the chat that we'd like to hit now, or should we just keep rolling?
Yeah, let me jump into a few questions here that have popped up let's get those addressed before you jump into anything else. And first of all, what do you think I'm in the mood for lunch now? Pizza, believe it or not. Anyway, all right, so one question that popped up. Do I have to use the transfer and in-transfer steps together always, or are there situations where it's not necessary to explicitly use the end transfer step? Will using the transfer step without in-transfer cause errors?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I am going to be quite honest that this is something that I will, kind of just, use trial and error. So there is an end transfer step. Sometimes we need it, sometimes we don't. And I could, phone a friend for the exact reply. Honestly, I don't remember exactly what cases you need it because we can transfer into a node, into a station. So I apologize, but we can follow up with you for the exact reply on that. But in this case, I didn't have an issue transferring into a node. But in some cases, you do need an end transfer step.
All right, so I do have the person that asked the question, so I'll make note of that, Adam, and we can get back to them directly.
Very good.
Next question that popped up, and I think you may have addressed this when you were talking about tokens, but just to make sure we did, what happened to the original token from the process, and where can that original token be used in process logic?
Yeah, great question. So when we have multiple branches, right, you can see that sometimes that original token just sort of trails off into the end of the logic while there may be logic on another branch that's still carrying on. So let's see in our clear oven if we can track that. So the token that hits this search step is token 13. And I'm actually gonna, another instructional point that I wasn't sure if I was gonna cover is some of our steps that create tokens or can create tokens have a token wait action. So the action to be taken by the token arriving to the search step. So we can say wait until new token processing is completed, which is the strongest, or new tokens exit first, which is in between, or no wait. So if we say no wait, check out what happens. Right away, that token 13, you can imagine it sort of jumping from here to the end of the process, and it tells me that the clear oven process has ended. Certainly I could do, to your point, I could do additional things with that token here if I want on this branch. Now, if I keep this as the default, the difference is that my logic down the found branch sort of happens before, so we're sort of holding that token until a later time. Great question.
Perfect. All right, let me ask, there's several more here, but let me ask them, and then maybe you can get back to your stuff if we don't run out of time. Is it possible to modify the process logic of an object from the standard library?
Yeah, absolutely. So check this out. In the trace, we see all this stuff. Like traces, there's so much information here in the trace. But I want to make sort of a good point to answer your question. Like, I have this pizza oven on failed process. So this column is indicating that these are processes being executed somewhere. So pizza oven is a server, and what we're going to do next is actually go back to the facility view and subclass a server, which is kind of a way that I can take a look inside this object or modify it if I'd like. I've created a custom object. And the processes tab of that object shows me sort of all this logic. So fun fact is that what makes all the Simio objects sort of do what they do is actually all process logic, which is great because I can come in and modify or customize them using the process logic I'm already familiar with from the model level. So for instance, in here somewhere, we're going to see that on failed process that's being reflected in the trace as it executes. Doing this can be a good exercise too to just learn about process logic. So you see what's happening in the trace in the model, you can track it back to processes being executed inside that object. And if you want to change stuff, you can override it and make adjustments and always restore back to the original configuration. Good question.
Great. All right, this next question is, I think, a little more philosophical in nature, but I'm going to ask it and see if you want to address this or if we want to take it offline. So the question was, the person said that they had trouble with a model at the beginning, and they emailed our support, and support helped them out right away by telling them to use link weight, and it worked perfectly. And the question is, how do I being the questionnaire, how do I get to this point of understanding to use this link weight, short of basically being an expert or being, a technical support person on the Simio side? Is there a way you would recommend to kind of understand that better?
Can you repeat the front end of the question? Link weight is what the question is about.
Yeah, they said they had trouble with a model and emailed support, and our support basically came back to them to use the link weight, and it worked perfectly. And they just didn't know even how to start there, and they were asking, is there a better way to kind of get to that point? And like I said, that was more philosophical in nature. So
Yeah.
if you can't answer the question, we can always get back to them.
No, I'm just glad it wasn't about the end transfer step. And thinking about that, I may have a better answer to that as well. So the question is a good one. And honestly, one of, I think, the strengths of Simio as an organization is our engineering support. So really, exactly what you did, I think, is a good strategy. if you're not sure, reach out to us, reach out to the support team. Now there are, I want to say as well that there are resources in the support ribbon. I'm not sure if you've had the Simio training. So my last slide as we wrap up is going to say, for further learning, reach out to your account manager about Simio University online training, where we have topics about entity routing. So this question is a question about routing entities through the model for others out there, right? So basically, when I have some origin point with multiple destinations, I may have multiple paths coming from one origin point. I can assign a weight to those links and then tell my node to follow those link weights to determine the destination, right, or the link that's selected. So I would say do some of your own exploration through training, Simbits, or the help documentation. But if you're stuck, don't wait too long to reach out to our support team. And I'm glad to hear that you got a good answer that was helpful in this case.
Great, great. All right, next question. And to the prior questioner, if you don't mind, I did type back in the chat box here. Oh, there we go. They just typed their email in for me. I was going to ask them to type their email in privately, just so I'd have to search for it, but I got it. All right, next question is, can we have some sort of pie chart or visual indicators to see the token movement throughout the run?
The token movement, no. Is the answer. So the trace is the best way to follow what the token is doing and where it's going. In fact, it's the only way to do that. Okay. We can have pie charts for other things, like a cool technique. We talked a little bit about this symbols ribbon that appears when I select things. So I can attach to a server this resource state pie, for instance. And we'll call this, oven utilization of sorts. And this will show me, the state that resource is in, like failed, idle, or busy, right? And that will sort of update dynamically while the model runs. So we have this long repair time, and we had a shrinking percentage of processing time. So maybe you've seen this pie chart before, but the answer is no regarding tokens.
Okay. All right. Do you mind if I keep going with questions? There are other ones on here?
No, keep jamming. Right. And what I'll say is that I have a full version of this model that, if you'll allow me just a second. Yeah. So what will be a little tricky is that I had set up some more of those scenarios where I purposely get an error that's sort of educational that we work through. But I think what we'll do is post the full version so you can see a bit more logic. Maybe we'll add a document with it too, just sort of finishing out the talk track for a couple more, interesting or helpful points on process logic. But yes, please, let's prioritize the questions.
Perfect. All right. Will large model processes affect the running time of models? If yes, do you have any suggestions to work around that and not slow down the model's runtime?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And large processes, basically the answer to that question is no. We have models with, and not to be scary, but libraries essentially of process logic. And you can get sort of a sense, like when we go inside the server, as we did a minute ago, you can see there's quite a bit of this stuff. And this is a lot of process logic. It's not slowing down the server. But there are things you can do in process logic. You have to think just sort of logically, if you have any programming background or experience with, software or data. For instance, if I repeatedly search, so what we didn't cover is searching table rows, but that will be covered in the full model. If I'm repeatedly searching through a table of 10,000 rows or like some huge number of rows, and I'm doing that every second, so you have to think about is there's the logic, and then there's the when am I executing this logic and how often. So if I'm searching through through 10,000 rows every second, that will slow down your model. So the search is like really powerful, but one of the things that we say is sort of use this with caution. Most of the time you'll be okay, but when you get into searching large collections of things, you can have a little performance hit. There's a couple other things, but I think that's the best example. So Another tip is just monitor the run performance of your model as you make changes. If you make an edit and all of a sudden your model's crawling, again, reach out to us, or back out of that step, try something different. But we have huge models with a ton of process logic that run really fast. So if you do it well, there's no implicit hit to processing because of process logic. Great
Perfect.
question. Thanks.
Yep. All right. We have about 3 minutes left, and I've got 3 or 4 more questions. So I'll get to these, and then we can jump to it. Some steps have an advanced option for object type, but what does that refer to exactly? What would the difference be between token and parent object or associated object?
Yes. So let's see if we can give a quick but good answer to that. No, we're not going to be able to. So that is covered. That is one thing I plan to cover. It's going to be a little bit tricky to answer. So basically what you have to keep in mind is that sometimes in my syntax for a step, I type something like model entity dot picture. I didn't type like default entity 17. This isn't a specific entity. This is sort of a generic syntax, right? So how does this decide step know what the heck entity I'm talking about? Well, it's because of that association, that object reference. So when I hit, the decide step and the transfer step that ultimately sends a specific entity somewhere, and in this decide, it doesn't sort of say it here, but I'm checking this specific entity, and this is going to change for the other entities that come through, right? So let's see. So entity 21, see, we get a different result from the decide step. The first one was false. The second one happens to be true. So the reason this generic syntax maps to a specific entity is because the token's associated with that entity. So this is really, honestly, whoever asked this question, reach out to me personally if you'd like to go deeper on this, because there's about a 5 to 10 minute breakdown of how you control this. Another thing you can do that I wanted to cover is when you create a new token, so this is sort of a nifty way to create an additional branch in your logic, which we've done with a found step or creating entities. So this is similar but different. I can just create a new token. You can establish those object references when you create that. So if you want to sort of change what your token is seeing or related to, you can do that by creating a new token. So not a complete answer. It's a deep question, but appreciate it nonetheless.
Good, good. Now, two more user questions here. Let me ask them. I know we're out of time, but let me ask them anyway. One I will actually answer. So the question is, how do they get the full Simio model in this video recording? And in addition to that, about the online training that was mentioned. So to answer the recording and the model question, the recording with this session is being recorded as mentioned. Within probably anywhere from an hour to 24 hours, the recording will be up on the Simio webpage for rewatch purposes. So it'll be out there, as well as Adam will provide this model to us. We will also publish this model on the webpage that is referencing the same link for this webcast. You'll also see a link to download this model. So both of those will be out there, hopefully within, like I said, an hour to 24 hours based upon the actual processing of the model, or processing of the recording. And then the next question is the online training. So Simio University is our online training platform. Simio U is a user subscription model. My recommendation would be go to simio.com, review our educational or academic, our training platform. If you have further questions about it, reach out to either myself or your account manager, whoever that might be that you work with in regards to buying Simio or acquiring Simio, and they can explain to you how to get access to Simio U. So that's my question answered. And then the last one, Adam, is can you also reference for process logic to a data sheet to load it, or is the way to design it by drag and drop like you showed in the webcast?
So a data sheet, I mean, basically No, like sort of way under the hood, process logic is XML. So, if you're really sort of nifty with that or you're into the API, there are other ways to, define process logic essentially, but 99% of the time you are creating graphically here in the processes tab of your model, just as we've done today.
Perfect. All right, I know we're 2 minutes over our time. I don't want to keep everyone too long. I think we've addressed pretty much just about every question asked. If you did ask a question during today's session and we didn't get to it, my email address and Adam's email address was shown at the beginning of this session, and I could always just flash it back up here very quickly. Let me just grab control back, okay? Just so they have our emails in case they want to reach back out to us. Maybe if I could share PowerPoint. I had a couple of weird things happen during the session, but there we go. Can you see that? Are you seeing? It says waiting. Come on.
Still don't see it yet, but
Yeah,
presumably it's firing up. Maybe.
it says to pop. Come on. All right, I'm not going to show it. Oh well, if you're watching this session on record, you can go back right to the beginning. I did have mine and Adam's email address up there. Mine is dvasaleni@simio.com. That's DVASALANI@simio.com, and Adam's is asneath. That's ASNEATH@simio.com. So you can reach out to either of us if we did not get your question addressed or asked during today's session. Otherwise, we do appreciate everyone's time today. If you have any further questions, like I said, reach out to us. Otherwise, we will hope to see everyone again in just about a month for our next session. So thanks again, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Goodbye. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.